When I was 13 years old, I stood barefoot in the cracked parking lot of a rundown motel on the edge of town, clutching a bulging trash bag that reeked of stale laundry and cheap detergent. My name's Caleb, and that was the last time I saw my parents in person. My mom didn't cry. She didn't even flinch. She shoved the bag into my arms like she was taking out the garbage and said, "You're old enough to survive without us." My dad, he sat in the driver's seat with the engine running, staring straight ahead like I didn't exist. No hug, no goodbye, just the crunch of gravel as they pulled away, brake lights disappearing into the night like the last trace of warmth I'd ever known from them. That first night, I slept behind a dumpster behind a Chinese takeout place. The pavement was cold. My stomach was hollow. I remember trying to cry, but the tears didn't come. Maybe I was too numb. Or maybe I already knew crying wouldn't change anything. I woke up to the sound of someone emptying the trash and barely managed to hide before getting kicked away like another piece of garbage. That morning, I sat on the curb with the trash bag beside me, watching people walk by with headphones in and coffee in hand, like the world had just kept moving and I'd been cut loose from it. The years that followed weren't glamorous. I bounced around shelters, occasionally snuck into school buildings to sleep, and eventually figured out how to make just enough money sweeping up at a garage run by a guy named Max who didn't ask questions. I told him I was 16 when I was barely 14, and he paid me in cash and leftover hot dogs from the vending cart outside. The day he taught me how to change oil, I remember thinking it was the first useful thing anyone had ever taught me. Eventually, he helped me get a GED and a place to stay, and I worked like my life depended on it, because it did. Fast forward 15 years. I'm 28 now, own my own auto repair shop. I live in a small house just outside the city, nothing fancy, but it's mine. Built everything from scratch, reputation, clientele, savings, even got a dog named Hemi. He barks at squirrels like they owe him money. I'm not married, don't have kids, but I've got stability, peace, and a quiet pride in the fact that I dragged myself out of the mud they left me in. I hadn't heard a word from my family in over a decade. Not a phone call. Not a birthday card. Not even a Facebook message. They vanished just like they always wanted me to do. And honestly, I made peace with it. I stopped looking them up. I stopped wondering where they were. I stopped hoping they'd change. People like that don't change. They just wait for the right opportunity to slither back in. That opportunity came last month. It started with a plain white envelope tucked awkwardly into my shop's mailbox. No return address. Just my name in loopy, unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a letter on floral stationery, of all things, with the words that made my stomach clench. "Caleb, we hope you're doing well. Your sister, Amanda, is getting married this fall, and we'd love for you to be there. It would mean so much to the family. We've booked a beautiful vineyard venue, but we're a little short on funds, and we're hoping you could help cover the cost. You've done so well for yourself. We're all so proud." I sat on the stool in my break room, reading that letter over and over, like maybe I'd hallucinated it. My sister Amanda, the same girl who used to lock me out of the house as a joke, who laughed when Mom said I was the mistake, who once told a teacher I was just some kid they were fostering for the government check. That Amanda. And now she was getting married and wanted me, the family reject, the disposable kid in the trash bag, to pay for her dream venue? The audacity was almost impressive. I didn't respond right away. I carried that letter around in my jacket pocket for days. Took it out during lunch breaks. Reread it at red lights. I couldn't tell if I was angry or just stunned. I'd built a whole life under the belief that I meant nothing to them. And now, suddenly, I was the golden goose. A walking wallet. Then, 2 weeks later, came the second letter. This time, it was from Amanda. "Hey Caleb, I heard Mom and Dad reached out. I really hope you can come to the wedding. We're doing this big vineyard ceremony, and it would honestly be so perfect if you helped out. You're like the only one in the family who actually has money, and it would be a really sweet way to reconnect. It's been so long. No apology. No acknowledgement of what they'd done. Just a breezy assumption that I'd be honored to fund the very people who discarded me like a worn-out shoe." And here's the kicker. She included a list of venue options, with price ranges, circled. Some were over $20,000. I sat there in my living room, holding that second letter in one hand and Hemi's chew toy in the other, and I laughed. A weird, bitter laugh that startled the dog and made me realize just how deep the wound still was. They hadn't just abandoned me. They'd erased me. And now they wanted me back, not as a son, not as a brother, but as an ATM. And that was when something in me shifted. See, I'd spent most of my life surviving, keeping my head down, making sure I didn't rock the boat. But something about those letters, something about the nerve they had, sparked a fire I hadn't felt in years. I didn't want to just ignore them. I didn't want to crumple the letter and move on. I wanted them to remember what they did. I wanted them to feel everything they made me feel. The cold, the hunger, the emptiness. I wanted them to know that I wasn't the same scared kid they left in a motel parking lot. I was someone else now, and they were about to find that out the hard way. But first, I needed to see just how far they were willing to go. I needed to let them think I was playing along. So I wrote back. Just 2 words. Let's talk. I didn't expect a response so fast. 2 days after I sent that short reply, let's talk, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to hear their voices yet. Not over the phone. Not without knowing how much venom they might lace it with. But when I listened to the message, something threw me off. Hey Caleb, it's Mom. I can't believe it's really you. We got your message. I know this is probably a lot, but it means so much that you're open to talking. Amanda is going to be so excited. Call us back when you're free, okay? Love you. Love you? She said it like those words had any weight after all these years. I didn't call back right away. I needed time to think, to prepare. But eventually I did. I waited until I closed up the shop one evening, sat in my truck for a while, heart hammering in my chest like I was 13 again, then finally hit call. Dad picked up. His voice hadn't changed. Same gravelly, detached tone. Yeah. It's Caleb. Pause. Oh. Yeah. Okay. Like I was someone who'd called to ask about car insurance, not the son he'd abandoned behind a dumpster. Mom took over quickly, her voice chirpy and high-pitched, like nothing had ever happened. Caleb. Sweetheart. How are you? I'm fine, I said. Busy. So what's this about? Well, your sister's getting married, she started, as if I hadn't read the letter. And we just thought, you know, with everything you've built, you'd want to be part of it. Part of it? I asked, as in paying for it. There was an awkward chuckle on her end. Oh, honey, we're not asking you to pay for everything. Just the venue. Maybe the catering. The DJ. Nothing crazy. I stared out the windshield. That's most of it. Well, you know, Amanda deserves a special day. And you're doing so well. We saw some pictures of your shop online. Looks amazing. You always were good with your hands. That line almost made me laugh. They'd never once encouraged me. Never celebrated my skills or showed up to anything I cared about. But now that my success benefited them, suddenly I was always gifted. You never asked me what I've been through, I said quietly. Don't start with that, Dad grumbled in the background. Mom tried to brush it off. Look, what's done is done. We've all made mistakes. Let's focus on moving forward, okay? I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. And that was enough for them to go full steam ahead. 2 days later, Amanda messaged me on Facebook. I hadn't blocked her, mostly because I never thought she'd try to reach out. The message was a barrage of exclamation points and emojis, completely ignoring the fact that the last time we saw each other, she told her friend at school I was a government trash baby. OMG, Caleb. Can't believe you're coming to the wedding. I'm so glad you're going to help. This is seriously going to be the best day ever. Then came another message, this time with a link to a Pinterest board titled Amanda's Dream Wedding, and a budget spreadsheet that looked like it was designed by someone planning the Oscars. I read it in silence. Hemi lay next to me, his head on my foot, and I remember petting him slowly as the realization sunk in. They didn't want a relationship. They wanted a sponsor. Over the next few weeks, I played along. I showed interest. I asked questions. I said I'd consider covering part of the costs, but needed to reconnect with the family first. That seemed to spark something in them. Suddenly, I was flooded with calls and texts. Mom wanted to meet for lunch. Amanda invited me to a brunch with her bridesmaids. Even Dad sent a rare message. Good to see you're not holding grudges anymore. It was surreal, like walking into a play where everyone had been handed a script I never got to read. They acted like we were some normal family, like our history had been wiped clean with a few shared Google Docs and wine tastings. I met them for brunch a few Saturdays later. Amanda wore a white sundress and kept tossing her hair like she was on a reality show. Her fiancé, Tyler, seemed nice enough, though he barely looked me in the eye. Probably had no idea who I really was. Just the long-lost brother with a cool business. Oh my God, Caleb, I have to show you the barn venue, Amanda said, flipping her iPad around. It's only $18,000 for the weekend, and the light in the photos is so dreamy. That's a lot, I said calmly. She pouted. Yeah, but you own your shop, right? I mean, it's not like you have rent. I clenched my jaw. I have employees, bills, equipment, life. She blinked, then laughed like I was joking. Right. But this is like a once-in-a-lifetime thing. I took a sip of my coffee. That's what Mom said when she left me in a motel parking lot. Silence. Cold and sharp. Amanda stared at me. Are you seriously going to keep bringing that up? Are you seriously going to pretend it didn't happen? She rolled her eyes. Ugh, why are you so dramatic? We were going through a lot. You were 10, I said. You spit on me as the car drove away. Amanda blushed and laughed awkwardly, glancing at her friends. That's so not true. It is. Tyler shifted uncomfortably. One of the bridesmaids suddenly found her mimosa fascinating. Mom called me that night. You embarrassed her, she said sharply. I told the truth. You could have been more tactful. She abandoned me. Tactful's off the table. The calls tapered off after that. Amanda stopped messaging. The Pinterest board went silent. But then came the real punch to the gut. I got another letter, this time from a lawyer. Apparently, Mom and Dad had listed me as willing to contribute a significant portion to the wedding in the planning documents submitted to the vineyard venue. The letter politely reminded me of the verbal commitment I'd made and requested a wire transfer of $22,000 to secure the location. I nearly dropped the paper. A verbal commitment? I hadn't agreed to anything. They were trying to trap me. Legally. Financially. I called the lawyer listed and clarified that no such agreement was made. He sounded confused, even sympathetic. Said he'd circle back with the family. And that's when I realized this wasn't desperation. This was entitlement. They fully believed I owed them this. As if my success was their reward for years of parenting. As if their abandonment had no consequence. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking back to that first night behind the dumpster. The way the wind cut through my hoodie. The ache in my stomach. The way I told myself, just make it one more night. And then the next. And the next. I thought of Max. Of the long nights at the garage. The busted knuckles. The half-eaten sandwiches. The years it took to feel human again. And now they wanted a check. A fat, grateful check. That's when I snapped. Not in a loud way. Not in a dramatic, movie-style scream. But in a quiet, steel-bending kind of way. The kind that comes from years of being forged in silence. The kind that doesn't burn out. I decided I wasn't going to just say no. I was going to show them what no really meant. But I had to wait. Plan. Let them believe I was still on the hook. Let them keep showing me who they really were. Because they hadn't even hit their worst yet. No. That came next. For a few days after that lawyer letter, I just sat with it. I didn't talk to anyone. Didn't even tell Max about it when he stopped by the shop, though I could tell he knew something was off. He watched me tighten a timing belt like it was a hostage situation and muttered, "That engine didn't insult your dog, you know." I gave him a dry smile and told him I was just tired. But I wasn't tired. I was drained. Like someone had reached into my chest and pulled out everything I'd built just to see what it would take for me to snap. That lawyer letter didn't just try to guilt me. It was an ambush. A manipulation dressed up in legal stationery. And the worst part? I almost believed it. A part of me, some splintered, twisted little corner of my brain, actually whispered, maybe you do owe them. Maybe helping out would finally win me their love, their respect. Maybe if I paid for Amanda's wedding, Mom would hug me. Maybe Dad would tell someone he was proud. It was stupid, and I knew it was stupid. But when you've been unloved for that long, your mind plays cruel games. The fall didn't happen all at once. It happened in little moments. I stopped sleeping well. Lay awake at night with Hemi curled against my legs, thinking about everything I'd survived and how none of it seemed to matter to the people who should have cared the most. I messed up a client's transmission install, first mistake I'd made in over a year. Had to eat the cost and fix it myself. Then came the panic attack, first one since I was 17. I was stocking coolant on the shelf, completely normal afternoon, and suddenly my chest locked up. Vision went fuzzy. Hands trembling so badly, I dropped a bottle and watched it shatter on the concrete like my last nerve had cracked with it. Max was the one who helped me through it. He didn't say much. Just sat with me in the office until I could breathe again, then handed me a warm bottle of root beer and said, "You got ghosts. But you're not one of them." That line stuck with me. I was letting them haunt me. Again. So I took a few days off. First time in a long time. Closed the shop early. Took Hemi to the lake. Sat on the hood of my truck with my boots in the dirt and just watched the water move. The quiet helped. The space helped. And slowly, I started piecing myself back together. It started small. I cleared out my apartment. Tossed old things I'd held onto for no good reason. Letters, receipts, even a pair of sneakers I hadn't worn since I was 19. I deep cleaned the place like I was scraping them out of my life, inch by inch. Then I did something I hadn't dared in years. I signed up for therapy. I didn't tell anyone at first. Just drove to the little brick building on Elm Street every Tuesday afternoon and sat across from a woman named Jen who asked gentle, hard questions and didn't flinch when I told her about the dumpster or the motel parking lot or how I used to eat packets of mustard from convenience stores when I had nothing else. Jen never pitted me. She never gave me that tilted head look people do when they don't know what to say. She just nodded, listened, helped me understand that what happened wasn't my fault, that I didn't deserve it, that forgiveness wasn't mandatory. I started sleeping better. The nightmares stopped. The shop picked back up, too. Word of mouth spread. People liked how honest I was, how fast I worked, how I never tried to upsell them stuff they didn't need. I hired a second mechanic, Diego, a kid from the local community college who reminded me way too much of myself at that age. Quick hands, sharp mind, just needed a chance. We clicked instantly. I paid him more than minimum. Showed him how to handle diagnostics, how to talk to stubborn customers, even helped him find a cheaper student loan refinance. He called me boss man, which I hated, but he wouldn't stop. With Diego on board, I had more breathing room. Took a weekend to attend a local car show. Didn't expect much, just figured I'd hand out business cards and look at some vintage Chevys. But something wild happened there. I ended up fixing a fuel pump for a classic '67 Mustang right there in the parking lot. Some guy's car had stalled, and the event organizer was about to have it towed. I offered to take a look. 15 minutes later, it purred like new. Turned out, the guy was a local radio host. He mentioned me on his morning segment the next day. The shop blew up. New clients. New opportunities. I partnered with a parts distributor. Made enough to expand. Built a second garage bay and turned the break room into a proper office. And through it all, I kept that one lawyer letter tucked into the bottom drawer of my desk. Not because I wanted to dwell, but because I wanted to remember. To stay grounded. To never forget what I came from. But even with everything going right, I knew the storm hadn't passed. Because silence from my family wasn't peace. It was plotting. And I was right. 3 weeks after the radio segment aired, I got another letter. This time hand-delivered. Amanda again. Hey Caleb, it read. I don't know why you've gone so quiet, but we're really counting on you. The Vineyard is about to cancel our reservation unless they get the deposit this week. Mom said you're good for it. I mean, you've got a whole shop now, right? That's, like, crazy successful. We need this, okay? No please. No apology. Just need. Like I was a bank. Like I didn't matter. Just the money did. That same week, I found out they'd told the venue I was the family benefactor. Those exact words. They dropped my name to get the reservation approved without a down payment. And when I didn't pay up, Amanda threw a fit on Facebook. Posted a vague status about deadbeat relatives who only pretend to care and people who love attention but not responsibility. A few mutuals saw it. One messaged me, asking if everything was okay. I told them the truth. Didn't embellish. Didn't rant. Just the facts. I was homeless at 13. They left me behind. Now they want me to pay for a wedding. The friend messaged back, what the dash? That became a pattern. A slow ripple effect. People started reaching out. Quietly. One by one. Some were friends of Amanda's who had no idea what she'd done. Others were extended family who believed I'd vanished out of rebellion, not survival. And with every message, I felt a little stronger. Like maybe I wasn't crazy. Like maybe, finally, I had a voice. But the turning point, the true rise, came a week later. I got a letter from Max. Not a text. Not a call. A real letter, in a yellow envelope, with grease smudges on the corner. Inside was a note, scribbled in his blocky handwriting. Kid, I saw your name on that radio show thing. You made it. I don't say much, but I need you to know something. You didn't just build a shop. You built yourself. From nothing. They don't get to claim a piece of that. Proud of you. M. I read it 3 times. Folded it neatly. Put it next to the lawyer letter in the drawer. 2 pieces of paper. One a debt they thought I owed. The other a truth I'd earned. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I smiled. Because I knew something they didn't. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was rising. And they were about to learn what happens when the kid they threw away grows into the man they underestimated. But first, I had one more card to play. One they would never see coming. I didn't rush it. Revenge, when it's rushed, looks petty. Sloppy. Like you're still playing their game. And I was done playing anything on their terms. This wasn't about a childish need to humiliate them. It was about clarity. Justice. Making sure they understood who they left behind. And who I became without them. I started by collecting information. Quietly. Patiently. See, my family always had a tendency to overshare when they were bragging. Amanda especially. Her entire life was curated through Facebook and Instagram stories. Every brunch, every dress fitting, every wine tasting. She lived for the little red hearts. I spent a few nights just scrolling through her social media, watching the pieces of their world fall into place. I noted every vendor tagged in her captions, every venue previewed, every bridesmaid selfie. You'd be amazed what people reveal when they're trying to look impressive. From her posts, I figured out the exact date and location of the wedding. October 14th, at a vineyard 2 hours north of where I lived. That alone was enough to get started. Then came the budgeting spreadsheet. Remember that? The one she sent me weeks ago? It was still public on Google Drive. She must have forgotten she'd shared it with me. Or she just assumed I'd forgotten. Either way, I made a copy. Inside it was a full breakdown. Deposits due, balances outstanding, even dress fittings and groomsmen rentals. She'd logged her estimated honeymoon costs and tagged her preferred donor next to each section. For the venue, next to the $22,000 due, was a cell labeled Caleb. That cell turned my stomach. But I left it. I wasn't going to delete it. I wanted to see what else she thought she could get from me. Next, I started reaching out to vendors. Not as myself, at least not the version she knew. I created a new email, c.malcolm.ventures@gmail.com. Sounded legit enough. In the messages, I said I was handling payment processing for the family and needed to confirm the balances due. And it worked. One vendor, the caterer, replied with a full invoice. Another, the flower guy, said he hadn't been paid anything yet and was hoping Caleb comes through. I kept all the emails, all the statements. I wanted everything in writing. It didn't stop there. I called the vineyard next. This time, I didn't use an alias. I wanted them to know. Hi, I said. My name's Caleb Malcolm. I'm listed as the financial sponsor for Amanda Malcolm's wedding. The woman on the line, Leslie, immediately brightened. Oh yes, we're so excited to host her. Beautiful couple. And thank you for offering to cover such a big part of it. I paused. Let the silence stretch. Then, I never offered. Oh, I never signed anything. I never confirmed payment. Amanda and my parents named me without my consent. There was a pause. Then the sound of frantic clicking, probably checking the system. I'm very sorry. We were told you'd cover the deposit. That's why we allowed the reservation without a down payment. Yeah, I said. That's what they do. They tell stories. I'd like that removed immediately. I'm not paying a dime. Leslie hesitated. We do require the deposit within 60 days of the event or the booking is canceled automatically. But I'll update our records to reflect your position. Please do. And, Mr. Malcolm? Yeah. You're not the first person they've pulled this with. You might want to keep your distance. I thanked her, hung up, and sat there staring at my phone. I wasn't surprised. Just confirmed. They weren't just entitled. They were habitual. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was their pattern. Use people. Discard them. Rewrite the story to make themselves the victims. But this time, I was holding the pen. The final piece came when I reached out to my uncle, my dad's older brother, Rick. He'd always been the black sheep of the family, which probably explained why I liked him. He used to sneak me candy at holidays and tell stories about how he ran away at 17 and joined a traveling auto show. Dad called him a burnout. I called him a survivor. We hadn't spoken in over a decade, but I found his number through a cousin on my mom's side. I gave him a call. Rick, it's Caleb. Well, I'll be damned. His voice was raspy but warm. Like an old coat you forgot still fit. Didn't think I'd hear from you, he said. I'm calling about Amanda's wedding. Oh boy. He snorted. Let me guess. They want you to pay for it. They told people I already had. He laughed, loud and full. That tracks. I told him everything. The letters. The vendor lies. The Facebook guilt trips. The lawyer. Rick listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. Then, when I finished, he let out a long sigh. I always knew your folks were messed up. But this, he said, this is a new low. I need a favor, I said. Actually, a couple. Name M. First, I asked him to confirm a few things. Family gossip, who knew what, which cousins still talked to whom. I needed to know the lines of communication. Who would believe what? Second, I asked him for photos. Old ones. Preferably of the motel. Of my parents. Of anything that might help me document my past. Got a box in the attic with all that junk, he said. Even got some of your baby pictures they gave me before they moved. Guess they didn't want the extras. He said that so casually. I nearly dropped the phone. They gave you my baby photos? Yeah. Said you probably wouldn't want him. He paused. Guess they didn't plan on you making it this far. That sentence sat heavy in my chest. They were wrong, I said softly. You bet your ass they were. A week later, a brown box showed up on my doorstep. No return address. Just a piece of masking tape that said, for Caleb, raise hell. Inside were the photos. A few VHS tapes. Old report cards. Even a faded drawing I'd made in crayon of our old living room. It hit me harder than I expected. Like I'd opened a time capsule I forgot I buried. But the most important thing in that box? A motel receipt. Dated the week they left me. In the number of guests field? 2. I felt something click. This was proof. Cold, printed proof that they'd written me out of the story even then. They didn't just forget me. They chose to. I scanned every document. Every photo. Archived it all. And then, I made a plan. Not revenge through violence. Not even legal action, though I kept that door open. No, this would be something else. Something quiet. Personal. Surgical. I was going to give them exactly what they wanted. But on my terms. I drafted a message. One that I knew Amanda wouldn't be able to resist. Hey, sorry for going dark. I've been swamped at the shop. Took time to think. Let's talk about the wedding. I hit send. She replied within 30 seconds. OMG, yes. You're the best. We were so stressed. I knew you'd come through. Then came the gushing texts. Pictures of flower samples. Cake testings. A PDF itinerary labeled Amanda's Fairy Tale Weekend. I read every word, taking notes. Then I told her I wanted to meet in person. Neutral territory. A public place. A small coffee shop halfway between us. She agreed instantly. We met the next Tuesday. She wore designer sunglasses and a smile too wide for the occasion. Caleb, she squealed, throwing her arms around me like we'd grown up playing tag instead of growing up with me sleeping behind a dumpster. I sat across from her. Calm. Quiet. She launched into a speech about linens and place settings and signature cocktails. I let her talk. Didn't interrupt. Just nodded. Then I pulled out a folder. Inside, printouts, emails from vendors, the vineyard conversation, the invoice with my name listed as benefactor, the scanned motel receipt with my name excluded, and a photo of me at 13, holding that trash bag, standing in front of the motel. Amanda's smile wavered. What's all this? I looked her dead in the eye. This is your reminder. She blinked. Reminder of what? I leaned in slightly. That I'm not your wallet. I'm not your narrative. I'm not your pity project. I'm the kid you left in the cold. And now I'm the man you tried to con. Her mouth opened. Closed. I haven't decided what happens next, I said. And I meant it. Because this wasn't the end. This was just the setup. The curtain hadn't even risen yet. And I was finally ready to take center stage. Amanda just stared at me. She didn't speak. She didn't blink. Just sat frozen in that little coffee shop booth with her mouth slightly open. One hand still wrapped around her untouched iced latte, like she could somehow squeeze the moment away. Her painted nails tapped against the plastic cup. Tap, tap, tap. Fast. Nervous. You don't have to read it all now, I said, tapping the folder once, calm as ever. But you should. She started, but the words got stuck. Because there was nothing to say. Not really. She hadn't expected this. Amanda was used to people folding, bending, quietly carrying her mess like it was a favor. But I wasn't that 13-year-old kid anymore. I wasn't standing in the cold, hoping they'd turn around. I was the one sitting at the table with receipts, while she floundered for control of a story that was no longer hers to tell. I didn't ask for this, she said finally, her voice thin. You did, I replied. When you told them I'd pay. When you handed my name over to vendors. When you tried to turn my life into your wallet. You did. Her voice sharpened. You think you're better than us just because you got lucky? I smiled slow. Amanda, I built Lucky. From the ground up. While you were sipping lattes and tagging wineries, I was changing oil for 12 hours a day. You think success showed up gift-wrapped? She scoffed. So what? You came here to shame me. Rub it in. No, I said. I came here to offer you one last opportunity. She blinked. Confused. Defensive. Opportunity for what? I reached into my pocket and pulled out another envelope. This one was thick. Clean. No tape. No stains. Just my handwriting on the front. For the ones who never looked back. Amanda took it like it might bite her. Opened it slowly. Pulled out the papers inside. Legal documents. I watched her eyes dart across the page. Her eyebrows knit together. Her jaw tightened. What is this? It's a formal withdrawal of consent, I said. I've already sent copies to every vendor listed under my name. The vineyard, the caterer, the florist, every single one now knows that I am not paying. And I've also sent a formal notice of misrepresentation to the legal office your brilliant little team used to try to trick me into a binding agreement. Her mouth opened, but I kept going. I've also sent copies of everything to a few local reporters. You'd be surprised how many are interested in a story about a man who built a business from homelessness while his family tried to con him into paying for a luxury wedding. You wouldn't, she whispered. I tilted my head. Wouldn't I? You're going to ruin everything. No, Amanda, I said, voice low but firm. You already did that. You lied. You schemed. You tried to weaponize my trauma. I'm just telling the truth. She slammed the papers onto the table. Mom's going to flip. I'm counting on it. I stood up. We're done here. You think this makes you the good guy? She spat. Too loud, eyes darting as other customers started glancing our way. No, I said, grabbing the folder, tucking it back into my coat. I'm not the good guy. I leaned in one last time. But I am the one who gets the last word. Then I walked out. I didn't look back. What followed over the next few weeks was equal parts glorious and ugly. First came the cancellation emails. The vineyard reached out to Amanda's fiancé's family to let them know the reservation had been terminated due to non-payment and misrepresentation. The caterer and florist followed suit. A couple vendors even blacklisted Amanda entirely. One of them, bless her, forwarded me a screenshot of Amanda's meltdown email, half threats, half teary emojis. Then came the social media spiral. It started small, cryptic posts from Amanda about people who betray family and ungrateful nobodies with hero complexes. But the real implosion happened when the story ran. The local paper published a feature. From dumpster to dealership, man builds empire after childhood abandonment. They interviewed me, used real quotes, showed real photos, including one, grainy, dark, of that motel parking lot. My face barely visible, arms wrapped around a trash bag. The story didn't mention Amanda by name, but it didn't have to. Everyone who knew us figured it out. The public reaction was swift. People shared the article like wildfire. My shop's Instagram blew up overnight. Clients came in just to shake my hand. One woman dropped off a lasagna and said, I read your story and cried. You remind me of my son. I got a letter from a woman who ran the shelter I stayed in once as a teen. She said she remembered me, that I was always polite, that she kept a copy of the article on her bulletin board now to show the other kids. Proof, she wrote, that broken doesn't mean finished. I cried reading that one. I didn't cry often, but I let that one through. Then came the fallout. Amanda's wedding unraveled in spectacular fashion. Turns out, Tyler's family had been footing part of the bill already, and when they found out Amanda had lied about my role in it, they pulled everything. His mom called it a red flag the size of Texas. Within a week, the wedding was postponed. A week after that, canceled. Amanda blamed me. Of course she did. Posted a long, bitter rant online about fake brothers and manipulative sob stories. But the comments weren't what she expected. People pushed back. Hard. Some reminded her of what she'd done. Others linked the article. A few just asked one simple question. Where were you when he was 13? She deleted the post the next day. Went silent after that. Mom and Dad didn't reach out directly. Not at first. But about a month later, I got a letter. Handwritten. The handwriting was shaky. Mom's. She didn't apologize. Not really. Just said things like, we were young, and we didn't know how to raise a boy like you. And you've done well for yourself. That should be enough. I folded the letter once, twice, then tossed it into the trash. And that was that. I didn't do all this to destroy them. That wasn't the point. The point was simple. They threw me away. They left me in the cold and never looked back. And when I rose from that place, when I built something with my bare hands, they thought they could return, not to make things right, but to take. I showed them I wasn't theirs to use anymore. I showed them I remembered. And now? Now I live free. The shop is doing better than ever. I hired 2 more mechanics. I let Diego handle the morning shifts now, and I'm finally taking weekends off. Hemi still barks at squirrels like they're plotting against him. I gave Max a plaque that hangs in the office. For the man who never left. Sometimes I drive past that motel. It's a gas station now. I don't stop. I just nod. Because that place didn't break me. It made me. And so, when people ask how I survived, I tell them this. I wasn't rescued. I rebuilt. And when they came back for a piece of it, I reminded them why I never needed them to begin with. I did not realize how invisible I had become to my own family until the day my sister looked me straight in the eye and told me to leave a place I had quietly paid for years before anyone else even knew it existed. That moment did not explode into shouting or drama. It was calm, surgical, the kind of moment that only hurts later when you replay it and realize how much it reveals about how people truly see you. For context, I am Conrad, 31, old enough to have lived a few different lives already, young enough to still believe family meant something permanent. I am the kind of person people forget to worry about because I have always handled things myself. I moved out early, paid my own way through school, built a career that looks boring on the outside but pays consistently, and learned a long time ago that keeping your head down is easier than arguing with people who have already decided who you are. My family loved to tell people I was independent, which was their polite way of saying they did not need to think about me much. My sister, Elise, is 2 years younger than me and has always been the opposite. Loud where I am quiet. Emotional where I am reserved. She was the kid who cried, and my parents rushed in. I was the kid who stayed silent, and they assumed I was fine. That dynamic calcified over decades. By the time we were adults, it was no longer something anyone questioned. Elise needed support. Elise needed understanding. Elise needed accommodations. I was just Conrad, the reliable one, the one who would adjust. When Elise got engaged, the family treated it like a national holiday. Group chats exploded. My mother called daily with updates I had not asked for. My father suddenly had opinions about table settings and seating arrangements, which was impressive considering he had never planned anything more complex than a barbecue. Everyone was involved. Everyone had input. Everyone, except me, apparently, had standing. The venue was a restored estate outside the city, the kind of place that looks modest online and overwhelming in person. Stone archways, old trees, a lake tucked just far enough away to feel private. My parents kept saying how lucky Elise was to have found it, how expensive it must be, how grateful she should feel. Elise basked in it. She loved the reactions. She loved being the center of gravity. What no one mentioned, not once, was how the venue had entered the conversation in the first place. I had bought the property 5 years earlier, long before any engagement, long before any wedding planning. At the time, it was rundown and off-market, the kind of investment that only makes sense if you are patient and invisible. I restored it slowly, quietly, through an LLC that bore no obvious connection to my name. I had plans for it eventually, but mostly I liked knowing I owned something solid and beautiful that did not demand attention. When Elise started venue hunting and complained about prices, I suggested the estate casually. I told her it was owned by a company I worked with sometimes. I said I could get her a favorable rate. She never asked questions beyond that. At first, I thought that discretion was a kindness. I did not want to make her wedding about me. I did not want the awkwardness, the comments, the sudden recalibration of how people treated me. I had learned that visibility changes relationships, and not always for the better. So I stayed quiet. I signed the paperwork. I handled logistics through intermediaries. I attended tastings like a guest, not an owner. And slowly, something shifted. Elise stopped asking. Then she stopped informing. Plans were made without me, about spaces I knew intimately. Decisions were finalized that affected areas I had personally renovated, and I found out through secondhand comments at family dinners. When I gently asked questions, Elise brushed them off. She started referring to the estate as my venue, not in the excited way brides often do, but in the possessive way people use when they think something belongs to them outright. My parents followed her lead. At one dinner, My mother mentioned rearranging the outdoor seating and joked that the owners would just have to deal with it. Everyone laughed. I smiled and took a sip of water, feeling something small and sharp lodge in my chest. Another time, my father talked about inviting additional guests beyond the agreed capacity and waved away concerns by saying, "It is a wedding. Rules are flexible." I nodded, because nodding had become my default response to being dismissed. The first real moment of disrespect came quietly, which is how the most dangerous ones always arrive. I showed up one afternoon to check on a few things. There was a planning meeting happening in the main hall. My sister was there with her coordinator, my mother, and two of her friends. They were discussing changes to the layout, laughing, moving chairs, treating the place like a blank canvas they could reshape at will. No one greeted me. No one asked why I was there. I stood near the doorway for a moment, waiting for acknowledgement that never came. Finally, Elise turned, saw me, and frowned like I had interrupted something important. "Hey," she said, not unkindly, but not warmly either. "Can you not be here right now? This is kind of a private meeting." I remember blinking, genuinely confused. I said something neutral, something small. I think I said, "I just wanted to check on a few things." She sighed, the way people do when they believe they are being patient with someone unreasonable. "This is my day, not yours. You should leave." There was no malice in her voice. That was what made it worse. It was said with certainty, with the confidence of someone who believes they are unquestionably right. Everyone else went quiet, watching me, waiting to see how I would respond. I nodded. I stepped back. I left. I told myself it was not worth making a scene. I told myself she was stressed. I told myself this was what supporting family looked like. But as I walked through the grounds, past the lake, past the stonework I had personally approved, one thought kept repeating itself in my mind, slow and steady, refusing to be ignored. She had no idea who actually owned the place she was about to get married in, and neither did anyone else. That realization did not make me angry right away. It made me curious. Curious about how far this would go. Curious about how much entitlement grows when it is never challenged. Curious about what people reveal when they think you have no leverage at all. I did not say anything. Not that day. Not the next. I went back to being the quiet presence at family gatherings, the brother who listened more than he spoke. I watched Elise's confidence expand, as if the world itself had rearranged to accommodate her happiness. I watched my parents orbit her needs, her stress, her expectations, while assuming I would adapt, as I always had. What they did not realize was that for the first time in my life, I was no longer adapting out of habit. I was paying attention. After that day, something subtle but irreversible shifted inside me. I did not confront anyone. I did not correct Elise. I did not suddenly assert myself or demand recognition. Instead, I did what I had always done best. I observed. And the more I watched, the clearer it became that the problem was not a single careless comment or a stressed bride snapping under pressure. The problem was that my absence, emotionally and practically, had become so normalized that my presence now felt like an inconvenience. The wedding planning accelerated. Group chats multiplied. There was the main family chat, the bridal party chat, the logistics chat. I was technically included in most of them, but functionally invisible. Decisions were announced after they were already made. I would scroll back through messages and realize entire conversations had happened without a single pause for my input, even when the topic directly affected me. Seating charts, rehearsal schedules, vendor access times. All of it finalized, presented as done deals. At first, I told myself this was normal. I was not in the wedding party. I was just the brother. But that excuse wore thin quickly, because the expectations placed on me did not shrink along with my involvement. If anything, they grew. My mother started calling with requests framed as assumptions. Could I drive some relatives from out of town? Could I help cover a shortfall because Elise had gone a little over budget on flowers? Could I take time off work to help manage things the week of the wedding? Each request came with the same tone, the same underlying belief that of course I would say yes, because I always did. The first time I hesitated, there was a pause on the line. "What do you mean you're not sure?" my mother asked, sounding genuinely surprised. "I have a deadline that week," I said carefully. "I can try to adjust, but I need to check." She sighed, not angrily, disappointedly. "Elise is under so much stress right now, Conrad. I just thought you'd want to help." I wanted to ask when helping had turned into obligation. I wanted to ask why my work was always flexible in their minds, but Elise's plans were sacred. Instead, I said I would see what I could do. I always did. Elise herself grew sharper as the weeks passed. Her patience for anything that did not center her timeline evaporated. She snapped at vendors, dismissed suggestions, and started speaking to me with a familiarity that bordered on contempt. She did not ask favors anymore. She issued instructions. One afternoon, she called me while I was in a meeting. When I did not answer immediately, she sent a text, "Call me now." I stepped out and called back. "I need you to talk to the venue manager," she said without preamble. "I can pass along a message," I replied. "No, you need to tell them they're being difficult," she said. "They're pushing back on the guest count again." I took a breath. "They're probably just enforcing capacity limits." She laughed, a short, humorless sound. "That's not how weddings work. Tell them to make it happen." Something in her tone made my chest tighten. "Elise, there are reasons those limits exist." There was a pause. Then her voice hardened. "Why are you suddenly acting like you're on their side?" It was a simple question, but it carried an accusation. I realized in that moment that in her mind, there were only two sides, hers and everyone else's. And I had just stepped out of line. "I'm not on any side," I said. "I'm just saying. Just do what I asked," she cut in. "This isn't about you." That phrase echoed in my head long after the call ended. This isn't about you. It never was, apparently. The favoritism became impossible to ignore after that. At family dinners, Elise's stress was treated like a fragile thing that needed constant cushioning. If she snapped, it was excused. If she forgot something, it was forgiven. If she overstepped, it was reframed as passion. Meanwhile, any boundary I attempted to set was treated as selfishness. At one dinner, I mentioned casually that I might not be able to attend every pre-wedding event due to work travel. My father put his fork down and looked at me like I had insulted him. "You need to prioritize family," he said. I looked around the table. Elise did not meet my eyes. My mother nodded in agreement. "I do prioritize family," I replied quietly. "I just also have responsibilities." My mother frowned. "We all make sacrifices." The implication was clear. Elise's sacrifices were brave. Mine were expected. The breaking point did not come all at once. It came in pieces, layered one on top of another until the weight became unbearable. The first piece was financial. A week later, my parents asked me to meet them for coffee. They were both unusually serious, hands wrapped around their cups like they were bracing themselves. My mother spoke first. "There's been a bit of an issue with the wedding budget," she said gently. I waited. "Elise didn't want to worry you," my father added. "But costs have gone up." "How much?" I asked. They exchanged a look. My mother named a number that made my stomach drop. It was not catastrophic, but it was significant. "And you want me to help cover it?" I said, not asking. "Well," my mother said, "you're in a better position than she is right now." There it was. The unspoken rule laid bare. My stability was a resource to be tapped, not something to be respected. "I've already contributed," I said. "More than once. And we appreciate that," my father said quickly. "But this is her wedding. It only happens once." I almost laughed at that. Instead, I stared down at my coffee, watching the surface ripple as my hand trembled slightly. I realized then that there was no amount I could give that would ever be enough, because the giving itself had become invisible. It was no longer generosity. It was entitlement. I said I would think about it. The second piece was public humiliation. At a larger family gathering, Elise was recounting a story about the venue, laughing about how she had whipped the staff into shape. People chuckled. Someone asked how she managed to secure such a beautiful place. She smiled brightly. "I just know how to negotiate," she said. "Some people are too passive." Her eyes flicked to me, briefly, like an afterthought. The comment landed. A few relatives glanced at me, then away. No one said anything. I felt my face grow warm, not from embarrassment, but from something colder. A realization that she was rewriting reality in real time, casting herself as the architect of something I had quietly built, and reducing me to a footnote at best. The third piece was the rehearsal dinner. I arrived early, as I had been asked to help with setup. I spent an hour moving tables, coordinating with staff, solving small problems that arose. By the time guests started arriving, I was exhausted but satisfied that things were running smoothly. That was when Elise pulled me aside. "I need you to sit in the back tonight," she said. I frowned. "What?" "The seating," she explained impatiently. We reorganized it. You're not near the front anymore. Why? She hesitated, then shrugged. We needed space for people who are more involved. More involved. I looked at the seating chart later. Cousins I barely knew had better seats. Friends of the groom. People who had met Elise a year ago. I sat where I was told. I smiled when spoken to. I applauded at the right moments. And I felt something inside me finally crack. The betrayal, the moment that changed everything, came 2 days later. I received an email from the venue's legal department. At first, I assumed it was routine. A formality. Then I read it again. And again. Elise, with my parents' full support, had attempted to renegotiate the contract directly. Not just terms. Ownership expectations. They had requested expanded control of the property for the wedding weekend and made assumptions about post-event usage that implied long-term access. They had spoken as if the place was already hers. They had done it behind my back. I sat alone in my office, staring at the screen, feeling a strange calm settle over me. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not stress talking. This was deliberate, calculated. A belief that I was either irrelevant or pliable enough not to matter. In that moment, I understood something with absolute clarity. They did not just underestimate me. They erased me. And for the first time, I stopped wondering whether I should finally say something. I started wondering what would happen when the truth could no longer be avoided. I did not confront them after that email. I did not forward it to the family chat or march into my parents' house demanding explanations. I closed my laptop, sat back in my chair, and felt something sink into me that I can only describe as a quiet grief. Not the dramatic kind. The slow, heavy realization that the people you keep bending for would never bend back. For a few days after that, I went through the motions of life like I was watching someone else do it. I answered emails. I showed up to work. I nodded along in meetings. But inside, I felt hollowed out. It was not just about the wedding anymore. It was about the accumulation of years where my value had been measured by how little I asked for and how much I gave. Seeing it laid out so plainly in that email stripped away the last illusion I had been clinging to. The rock-bottom moment did not come with yelling or tears. It came late one night, alone in my apartment, when I caught myself drafting a message apologizing for being difficult. I stared at the words on the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, and something in me recoiled. Apologizing for existing, for having boundaries, for quietly owning something that everyone else felt entitled to. I deleted the message and sat there in the dark, realizing how deeply that instinct ran. I slept badly that night. When morning came, I called in sick to work for the first time in years. I stayed home, not because I was ill, but because I needed to sit with the discomfort instead of running from it. I replayed moments from my childhood, my teens, my 20s. Times I had stepped aside so Elise could step forward. Times my parents had praised me for being easy, low maintenance, mature. I saw how those compliments had trained me to disappear. The wedding loomed closer, and with it, the pressure. My mother called daily now, her tone alternating between anxious and sharp. Elise sent clipped messages about logistics, assuming my compliance. At one point, my father asked me if I could cover a last-minute expense without even explaining what it was for. I said no, just that one word. There was a long silence on the line before he said, "That's disappointing." I hung up feeling like I had failed some invisible test. That was the lowest point. Not the email. Not the disrespect. That moment when I realized I had been conditioned to equate my worth with how much I absorbed without complaint. I sat on my couch afterward and let myself feel it fully. The sadness. The anger. The exhaustion. I did not distract myself. I did not rationalize it away. I let it be heavy. And then, slowly, something else surfaced beneath it. Clarity. For the first time, I stopped asking myself what I owed them and started asking what I owed myself. The answer was uncomfortable because it required change, and change meant conflict. But it was also strangely grounding. I could not control how they treated me. I could control how much access they had to me. The rebuilding did not start with dramatic gestures. It started with small, almost invisible decisions. I stopped responding immediately to messages. I took time before answering calls. When I did respond, I was polite but firm. I stopped volunteering information. I stopped preemptively fixing problems that were not mine to fix. The world did not collapse. The wedding plans did not unravel. The only thing that changed was the level of entitlement in the responses I received. Elise grew irritated. My mother grew anxious. My father grew distant. And I grew calmer. I started spending more time on things that reminded me who I was outside of my family's expectations. I threw myself into my work, not as an escape, but as a reaffirmation of competence. I met with my property manager and walked the estate again, this time not as a ghost in the background, but as someone reclaiming a sense of ownership, both literal and emotional. I made notes. I reviewed contracts. I ensured everything was airtight. There was something deeply grounding about standing on land I had built up piece by piece, knowing that regardless of how my family saw me, this existed because of my choices, my effort, my patience. I also started therapy quietly. I did not announce it. I did not frame it as self-improvement for anyone else's comfort. I went because I needed someone neutral to reflect back what I could not yet say out loud. In those sessions, I began to untangle the belief that being loved meant being useful. I began to see how often I had conflated peace with silence. The rise was not dramatic. It was steady. I began setting boundaries in ways that felt foreign but necessary. When my mother asked if I could attend yet another planning meeting, I said I was unavailable. When Elise demanded changes at the venue that crossed contractual lines, I responded with, "That won't be possible," and left it at that. I stopped explaining. I stopped justifying. I stopped cushioning the truth to make it easier for them to swallow. They noticed. The comments shifted. I was suddenly hard to reach. I was different lately. I was making things harder than they needed to be. Each remark confirmed what I was learning. My previous compliance had not been appreciated. It had been exploited. At the same time, something unexpected happened. Without the constant drain of managing their expectations, I felt lighter, more focused. I slept better. I laughed more easily with friends. I started planning things for myself again, small things at first, then larger ones. I remembered that my life did not exist solely as an accessory to someone else's milestones. There was one evening, about a week before the wedding, when Elise called me unexpectedly. Her voice was tense, brittle around the edges. "We need to talk," she said. "I'm in the middle of something," I replied calmly. "Can it wait?" She exhaled sharply. "This is important." "So am I," I said, surprising myself with how natural it felt. "We can talk tomorrow." She hung up without responding. I sat there afterward, heart pounding, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I had not raised my voice. I had not been cruel. I had simply refused to shrink. It felt like standing upright after years of crouching. The rise was also internal. I stopped narrating my choices through the lens of how they would react. I began thinking strategically instead of emotionally. I reviewed the situation as a whole, the patterns, the leverage points, the risks. I reminded myself that truth, when timed correctly, has weight, and that silence, when intentional, can be powerful. I did not feel triumphant. I felt prepared. By the time the wedding week arrived, I was no longer reacting. I was watching. Every assumption they made, every line they crossed, every decision they finalized without me, I noted, not with resentment, but with a calm awareness that this story was still unfolding. And as I stood once more on the grounds of the estate, watching final preparations take shape, I understood something with absolute certainty. They believed the hardest part was behind them. They had no idea the reckoning had not even begun. By the time the wedding week officially began, I had settled into a strange kind of calm. Not the fragile calm that comes from denial, but the grounded kind that comes from clarity. I was no longer asking myself whether I was overreacting or being unfair. I had already answered those questions. What remained was timing. And timing, I had learned, mattered more than volume. The setup did not start with confrontation. It started with structure. I met quietly with my attorney 2 mornings before the rehearsal, not because I needed permission to act, but because I wanted precision. We reviewed every document tied to the property: ownership records, operating agreements, event contracts, insurance clauses. I already knew the answers, but hearing them spoken aloud had a stabilizing effect. There were no loopholes, no shared authority, no ambiguity. The estate belonged to my company, which belonged to me. Any access granted for the wedding was temporary, conditional, and revocable if boundaries were violated. I did not tell my lawyer what I planned to do. I did not need to. I only needed to know that when the moment came, nothing could be twisted or reframed after the fact. From there, I began quietly aligning the people who mattered, the ones who actually had power in this situation. The property manager, the head of security, The on-site coordinator employed by the venue, not by my sister. I spoke to them individually, calmly, professionally. I did not vent. I did not dramatize. I simply clarified expectations and authority. If there's any confusion during the weekend, I told them, I'll handle it directly. They nodded, not because they were intimidated, but because they recognized clarity when they heard it. Professionals appreciate knowing exactly where the line is. I also prepared myself emotionally, which was harder than any legal or logistical work. I knew what was coming would hurt people. It would embarrass them. It would disrupt the story they were telling themselves about who I was and how this wedding worked. I had to be sure that I was not doing this out of spite. I asked myself a simple question. If they apologized sincerely tomorrow, would I still proceed? The answer surprised me. Yes, because this was no longer about an apology. It was about accountability. The closer we got to the wedding, the more entitled everyone became. It was almost fascinating to watch. Elise moved through the estate like it already belonged to her. She gave orders without checking. She approved changes she had no authority to approve. My parents echoed her confidence, reassuring relatives and vendors that everything is handled. Handled by whom, exactly, was never clarified. The day before the wedding, I overheard a conversation that crystallized everything. I was walking past the main hall when I heard my mother speaking to a group of extended family members. She was gesturing broadly, pride evident in her voice. We basically have full run of the place, she said. Elise negotiated it beautifully. It's practically ours for the weekend. I stopped walking. Not because I planned to interrupt, but because hearing it stated so plainly felt like watching the final brick being placed in a wall they had built around themselves. A wall of assumptions, of narratives, of entitlement. No one corrected her. No one questioned it. I continued walking, my steps steady, my thoughts sharp. That evening, Elise sent a message in the family chat with a list of instructions for the wedding day. Where people should be. Who needed to help with what time everything started. I was assigned several tasks, none of which had been discussed with me beforehand. Logistics, vendor coordination, problem solving. All the invisible work I had always done. I read the message. I did not respond. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Did you see the message? Elise asked, irritation already bleeding into her tone. Yes, I said. And I won't be able to handle those things, I replied calmly. What do you mean you won't? She snapped. We're counting on you. You didn't ask, I said. You told. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Are you seriously doing this now? This isn't the time, she continued, voice rising. You always do this when things are important. That was new. I had never done this before, but I let it pass. I'll be there as a guest, I said. Nothing more. There was a long silence on the line. When she spoke again, her voice was cold. You're being selfish. I ended the call without responding. That night, I barely slept, not from anxiety, but from anticipation. I ran through scenarios in my head, not catastrophizing, but planning. What if they tried to override staff? What if they ignored capacity limits? What if they attempted to extend access beyond what was agreed? I knew how each situation would be handled. I had already ensured it. The morning of the wedding arrived bright and deceptively peaceful. The estate looked exactly as it should. Immaculate. Calm. Ready. I arrived early, dressed simply, blending in. No one paid much attention to me, which was exactly what I wanted. Elise was already in motion, surrounded by people, issuing instructions. My parents hovered close, basking in the energy, the importance of it all. At one point, Elise caught sight of me and frowned. I thought you said you weren't helping, she said sharply. I'm not, I replied. Then why are you here so early? I was invited, I said. Wasn't I? She hesitated, clearly deciding whether to push. She didn't. She turned away, already distracted by something else. As the morning progressed, small cracks began to appear. A vendor asked a question Elise couldn't answer. A staff member gently pushed back on a request. Elise's frustration grew. She snapped. She blamed. She assumed someone else would fix it. That someone had always been me. Except this time, I stayed exactly where I was. My mother pulled me aside at one point, her smile strained. Can you please just help smooth things over today? She whispered. This isn't about old grudges. This isn't a grudge, I said quietly. It's a boundary. She looked at me like I had spoken a foreign language. As the ceremony time approached, I felt the shift. the subtle realization settling over them that the safety net they were used to leaning on was no longer there. The estate still functioned. The event still moved forward. But every time they tried to bend the rules, they met quiet resistance. Professional resistance. Polite resistance. Unmovable resistance. And still, no one connected the dots. I stood near the edge of the grounds, watching guests arrive, watching Elise glow under the attention, watching my parents soak in the admiration. I felt no anger, no satisfaction, just a steady resolve. They believed the venue was theirs. They believed authority flowed through them. They believed I would never challenge that belief. And as the final preparations locked into place, I knew the moment was coming. Not because I was rushing it, but because they were walking straight toward it, convinced they were untouchable. All I had to do now was wait. The moment came quietly. No music swelled. No dramatic announcement echoed through the estate. It arrived the way consequences usually do, calm, procedural, and irreversible. The ceremony itself went smoothly. I will give Elise that. She looked radiant walking down the aisle, smiling like the world had finally aligned itself properly beneath her feet. Guests dabbed at their eyes. My parents held hands. Applause rolled across the lawn like a practiced wave. Anyone watching would have thought this was the happiest day of our family's life. I stood toward the back, exactly where I had been placed, watching it all with a strange sense of detachment. Not bitterness, not triumph, just awareness. I was already past the emotional peak. Everything from here on out was logistics. The real shift happened during the cocktail hour. Elise had decided, without authorization, that additional areas of the property would be open to guests. Private rooms, storage wings, the lakeside path that had been explicitly excluded from the contract due to insurance restrictions. I watched as guests wandered where they were not supposed to be, drinks in hand, laughing, oblivious. The property manager approached Elise once. She waved him off. Then twice. She snapped at him. The third time, she told him, loudly, that she would handle it, and that he was ruining her day. That was when he looked across the lawn and met my eyes. I nodded. He walked away from Elise and came straight to me. I think it's time, he said quietly. Yes, I replied. It is. What happened next unfolded faster than anyone expected and slower than they wanted. The venue coordinator, my coordinator, activated the contingency protocol. Security did not rush in. Staff did not raise their voices. They simply began doing what they were contractually obligated to do. Certain areas were closed. Guests were gently redirected. Alcohol service paused temporarily while licenses were re-verified. Music volume was lowered until proper permits were confirmed. Elise noticed immediately. What is going on? She demanded, marching toward the nearest staff member. I need you to speak with the property owner, the coordinator said evenly. Elise laughed. I am the client. The coordinator did not argue. She simply gestured toward me. Elise turned. The look on her face in that moment is burned into my memory. Confusion first, then irritation, then something like disbelief, as if she was trying to solve a puzzle that suddenly had too many missing pieces. Why is he involved? She asked. The coordinator didn't answer. She stepped aside. I walked forward. Hi, Elise, I said calmly. My parents had noticed by now. They moved closer, my mother's smile already faltering. What's happening? My father asked. I took a breath. Not because I was nervous, but because this was the last moment before everything changed. There's been a misunderstanding, I said. About authority. Elise scoffed. This is not the time for whatever this is. I agree, I said. That's why I tried to address it earlier. She opened her mouth to interrupt me, but the property manager spoke first. We've exceeded permitted access areas, he said. And since the owner has not authorized these changes, we've had to scale back. The word owner landed like a dropped plate. My mother turned to me slowly. What does he mean? I looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time in my life, I didn't soften the truth for her comfort. I own the estate, I said. Silence. Not the awkward kind. The heavy kind. The kind that presses down on everyone at once. Elise laughed again, too loudly. That's not funny. I'm not joking. My father frowned. Conrad, I purchased the property 5 years ago. I continued evenly. Through my company. I offered it for the wedding under specific terms. Those terms were ignored. Elise's face drained of color. You're lying, she said, but there was no conviction behind it. The coordinator handed her a folder. These are the ownership records, "In the event contract," she said politely. Elise flipped through the pages, hands shaking now. My mother leaned in, reading over her shoulder. My father's jaw clenched. "You let us believe," my mother started. "I never claimed it was yours," I said. "You assumed." The fallout was immediate and messy, but not loud. Elise's anger came first. She accused me of sabotage, of jealousy, of trying to steal attention on her wedding day. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I let her speak until she ran out of words. Then my mother cried, quietly at first, then openly. She said she felt humiliated, betrayed, that I had made her look foolish in front of family. I nodded. That's how I felt when I was told to leave my own property. My father did not speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was low. "You should have told us." "I tried," I said. "You didn't listen." The practical consequences followed swiftly. The reception continued, but under strict enforcement of the original contract. Guest count was capped. Restricted areas remained closed. The timeline was adhered to precisely. No extensions. No exceptions. Elise spent most of the evening furious instead of celebratory, snapping at anyone who spoke to her. Family members whispered. Some looked at me with shock. Others with something like respect. A few avoided me entirely. By the end of the night, my parents barely spoke to me. Elise did not speak to me at all. The next day, the messages started. Some were angry. Some were apologetic. Some tried to reframe what had happened as a misunderstanding. I did not engage. I did not argue. I simply stated facts when necessary and stayed silent otherwise. The distance that followed was not easy, but it was clean. My parents eventually came around, not with full understanding, but with a grudging acknowledgement that something had broken long before the wedding. Our relationship changed. It became quieter, more careful, less demanding. Elise and I do not speak anymore. I wish I could say that makes me sad. What it actually makes me is free. The estate still stands. Peaceful. Whole. Mine. And for the first time in my life, so am I.